a good period of time, and it was
Don't
being
say
in
how
Charlotte.
long. Okay.
What's that?
Don't say how long.
just a good period of time. Alhamdulillah. So, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Jackson.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How you doing, man?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Man.
Good to see you.
You look good. You look good and happy and bright. That's good to see. Good to see, man. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So, inshallah, I think Sabria is going to go ahead and introduce you, then we'll get started with the conversation.
All right,
Inshallah. Sabria knows I like short and sweet introductions, right?
I cut it down. Okay.
There you go.
So, Bismillah, let me quickly go to his bio. All right, so Dr. Jackson, as many of you already know, is the King Faisal Chair of the Islamic Thought and Culture and Professor of Religion and American Studies and Ethnicity at USC, the University of Southern California. He's also a co-founder, course scholar, and member of the Board of Trustees of the ADEM program, so the American Learning Institute for Muslims, an academic institution where scholars, professional activists, artists, writers, and community leaders come together to develop strategies for the future of Islam in the modern world. He is also the author of several books, including Islamic Law in the State, Islam and the Black American, Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering, and most recently, Sufism for Non-Sufis, in addition to several other books. His bio is much longer, but I won't make him sit here and listen to this. So we're honored to have him here, very excited. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or send them directly to me, and we'll get them answered, inshallah. All right, Mike, it's over to you.
So that's me? No, that's supposed to be Malik, right?
Yeah. So first question, Dr. Jackson, we want to again thank you for coming. Tell us about your conversion.
Let me preface my conversion story with the fact that I'm personally rather suspicious of conversion stories. I don't lend a whole lot of credence to them. No, I shouldn't say I don't lend a whole lot of credence to them, although on some level, I guess that's true. What I'm trying to say is that I think that conversion is a much more complex and a complicated process than people think. And it's not all entirely a matter of a conscious connecting the dots from A to B. There are levels involved in the conversion process that are very conscious, and there are levels that are deep down below in the subconscious. And I think that when we try to put forth conversion stories, we try to pretend that the whole thing was a very consciously mapped out, entirely a reasoned process, as if we as human beings are nothing more than reason. I mean, I think that we tend to, and I don't want to get overly academic here, but we tend to fall into the understanding that as human beings, reason is the only tool that we have for knowing, and therefore anything that we claim to know, we should be able to understand and therefore explain, right? And I just don't think that conversion works that way, right? In fact, I mean, I'll on a slight tangent here, I mean, even scholarship, I was down in my library a couple of nights ago, looking through some things, and I came across some papers that I had written 15, 20 years ago. And what occurred to me was that, some of the same thoughts I have today, I had then, but I wasn't aware of that continuity. You follow what I mean? I mean, those inclinations were much more deeply down into my sort of subconscious than they were, something that I consciously thought of on a daily basis. Okay. I mean, asking somebody like, how did you convert? It's almost like, how did you fall in love with your wife? And by the way, if you ever ask that question, don't answer it. Well, no, I mean, in a sense, that's a good analogy because the problem is that whatever answer you give, if it's a rationalized answer, I mean, it should apply to anybody who has the same basic qualities as your wife, but it doesn't. So there's something very special about that you can't necessarily quite get to. You follow what I'm saying? All right.
Right.
So with that in mind, I'll say this. I mean, conversion for me was not. I mean, I didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I think I want to be a Muslim, and so let me go out and find out how to do that. I think that like most young people, around 19, 20, 21. And I think that's an interesting age. And I guess that age differs depending on the time period in which you grow up. I grew up in a time when the 18 and out rule was still in effect. 18 and out. If you stay home, you pay rent. I mean, that was the era in which I grew up. And it's very interesting that, you come through that. And by the time I was like 19, 20, 21, the world began to appear to be a very different place to me. That was the time during which, for example, my father became a genius. All right. I mean, all the things that he had tried to tell me before that I had blown off, this guy didn't know what he's talking about. All of a sudden, I'm out there, I'm dealing with the real world, and he becomes a genius. Right. I mean, first person you want to talk to, is your dad or maybe your mom. So it's a period of discovery. All right. Now, religiously, I don't think that I've ever lived a day in my life where I didn't believe in God. Atheism was just a very foreign concept to me. All right. I wasn't a very practicing, person. I was nominally a Christian, but I wasn't very, very practicing. But the idea that God exists and has certain expectations, that was a part of my psychological makeup. And I guess that, maybe one of the lessons that, we need to learn, as Muslims, I guess that one of the problems I had, and I don't, you talk about these things and they can come off sounding, polemical. And I don't mean it in that way. So when I say that I converted from Christianity, that's not a slight to Christianity. That's not an attempt to critique Christianity. All right, it's just my story. But I think that what I experienced was that I don't think that I could find a Christian mode of being that enabled me to embrace the aspirational side of myself as a young man who wanted to be cool, who wanted to be accomplished, who wanted to have a certain sort of brand of manhood, et cetera, et cetera. And I had been looking for that, for quite some time. Islam, as it had been practiced in the area in which I grew up, it seemed to offer all of that. It seemed to offer a sort of a God-centered mode of being that wasn't corny, that wasn't nerdish, that didn't mean that you withdrew from the world. It was a very life-affirming kind of mode of religiosity. And I think that was the first thing that sort of began to appeal to me. Now, of course, there's a broader context to all that. I grew up in Philadelphia. The Nation of Islam was a very prominent part of the landscape at that time. I was never a member of the Nation of Islam. I just didn't. The racialized theology just never appealed to me. But what did appeal to me was the sense that one could take ownership of the redefinition of oneself. I think that appealed to a lot of Black Americans at that time. And so, that was the beginning, and the rest of it is a matter of personalities whom I met. I'm hesitating to go on with this story because we have all this bid'ah, all these.
No.
I'll tell you the night that I decided I'm going to be a Muslim. All right, and yes, I'm a professor now, but I wasn't always a professor, so just keep that in mind. I was standing right across the street from my mother's house. On the corner of the recreation center. And we were just standing there, a group of us, doing what guys do, standing on the corner. We're watching the girls jump in the pool. There are certain bottles present. I won't say what was in those bottles. There are certain smoking materials present. I won't say what those smoking materials consisted of. And we were just shooting the breeze like people shoot the breeze. And there was one guy there, and I still remember this very vividly. He was standing there, fully engaged in the conversation like everybody else. And I began to notice something strange about him. The first thing I noticed was that there was this absolutely no profanity coming out of his mouth. And there was calm, serene self-confidence about him. Now, it's not simply the fact that he was not using any profanity, but this guy was a known killer. I mean, this guy was a straight up gangster. No doubt about it. And here he was really displaying this very noble, self-respecting mode of being right there on the corner in the hood. And that attracted my attention. And, someone would hand him the bottle and he'd just say, no thanks. And never skip a beat. He wasn't overly judgmental. He wasn't like, get that stuff out of my face or anything like that. Just no thanks. And he wouldn't skip a beat. And, my eyebrow went up a little higher. Somebody would hand him the smoking material. And he would just, no thanks. And I'm looking at the guy and I'm like, whoa. Because on some level, I have been very interested in that mode of being. I mean, how he could be there with that clean living mode of existence, all right? And yet fully engaged in who he was and with his peers, right? So when we began to disperse, I sort of eased over to him. And I said, basically, what's up? And he said to me, well, you should know that I'm an Orthodox Muslim. Back then, that's what Sunnis would call. You had the Nation of Islam, and then you had so-called Orthodox Muslims. And he said, I'm an Orthodox Muslim, and I've been practicing for a while, and this is just the way of my life now. And he was working at a barber shop, and we walked together back to the barber shop, and he gave me this little thin book, a little green book. I still remember the cover. It was by Maududi, called Towards Understanding Islam. And I read that. Later on, he took me down to the Islamic Center of Philadelphia on Broad Street. And the rest is pretty much history. But I mean, clearly, that night on the corner does not explain conversion.
Right.
It explained it for me, but it explained it for everybody else who was there. But those events were in some ways sort of a culmination. It did constitute my finding the kind of mode of existence I was looking for crystallized in an actual human being. Not just something you read about, something you actually see. And it's very interesting to me because I think that one of the things that we now miss as Muslims, I mean, we don't understand that Islam will not survive without models. Scholarship and knowledge and all that, that's all fine, but it will not flourish without models, right? People who model a mode of existing in the world that you want to imitate, that you want to be a part of you. And I think that person, he was the personification, that I encountered at that particularly critical moment in my life. And I mean, I've always tried to be the kind of person, if I did something, I did it seriously. And as I said, the rest is history. Pretty boring story, right?
No, thank you. So I would like to follow up on that. If you were talking to you, what advice would you give yourself as a convert? Now, if you're speaking to me.
Okay. If myself today speaking to that guy who converted back then.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, you see, you can't know what you can't know.
True.
And you can't know what you don't know. I mean, when you don't know, well, you can, but you don't know what you don't know when you don't know it. I mean, I think that there are a lot of lessons there are a lot of things that I could say to myself at that time. But again, I don't think that it's a matter of instruction coming from Dr. Jackson or any other individual, all right, without a communal sort of network and support system, all right, that brings all of that into personification that will really benefit anybody.
Okay, so
does that make sense to you? Does that make sense to you?
No, it makes sense.
I would have talked about, the kind of people you want to surround yourself with, the kind of people you want to try and learn from, the kind of people you want to be aware of, or beware of, etc. But I'm not sure much of that would have made sense to him in the abstract.
So when you meet a young person today who converts, and I've seen you do this, so what do you tell them?
Well, that depends on who they are. And I think that that's one of the problems that we have. There is no one size fits all. If I were talking to somebody who grew up in the neighborhood like I grew up in, that would be one conversation. If I'm talking to a young college student on the Ivy League campus, that's another conversation. All right. And as somebody who sort of lived in both of those worlds, I mean, I think that I could have both of those conversations. All right. One of the things that I would say to both of those individuals, I think that one of the things we've got to get back to in terms of Islam is that fundamental principle of tawheed. We have to understand, and the Quran is very clear about this. I mean, one of the big problems of religion, all right, is that religious knowledge is a very easy tool that can be used to dominate people as opposed to empowering them, all right? And this is a big problem for religion. I mean, religious scholars can deny it, but the Quran belies them. I mean, the Quran says, talking about Bani Israel and other communities. And by the way, Bani Israel were Muslims at the time, so let's, not miss the lesson. Knowledge came to them. They never differed among themselves until what? Until knowledge came to them, and they took it as a means of lording over one another. All right, that's several times in the Quran. All right. And one of the things that I would tell young people is that you must work on solidifying your relationship with Allah. You cannot allow your Islam to be reduced to the mere reality of being publicly validated for this or that or the other. All right? Because what can happen is that, I grow the beard, I learned the little Arabic words, mashallah, alhamdulillah, etc., and that earns me enough public validation to basically be left alone. All all right? Or maybe to be held in a certain esteem. Well, if all of my aspirations, all right, are directed towards that, okay, who I am as an individual, I experience arrested development. I don't grow as a Muslim because my focal point is not really there, all right? And, you know, you should never be afraid of another human being religiously. You should never be afraid to tell them to go fly a kite. All right? No. And I don't mean that you should be, no, please. This is very important because especially today, because, you know, one of the problems we have is just a lack of adab, a lack of etiquette, a lack of manners. I'm not saying you should run around telling people to fly a kite. All right? You shouldn't. I'm saying you what? The reason you don't do that should not be because you're afraid to, religiously speaking. You understand what I mean by that? Right? I have to understand that ultimately I'm going to answer to Allah. That doesn't mean that, you know, I don't know something, I'm too proud to ask. Of course I ask. I ask people who I think know. All right? I acknowledge the fact I don't know everything. And there are scholars who can tell me. And I go to those scholars and I ask them. All right? But I do not end up in a position where the state of my heart is contingent upon what the scholars or anyone else ultimately think about me. And that to me is an important lesson that we as Muslims have to learn. Because oftentimes, because we don't learn that, because so many people don't learn that, you know, their Islam is really contingent upon the health of the Muslim community. And the problem with that is that Muslims are human beings. They're gonna disappoint you. So when they disappoint you, what does that do with regard to your relationship with Allah? Does that make sense, Malik?
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Which leads me to my next question. I've heard you talk about America suffers from the legacy of our European, our European history, connection with history in regards to religion. Where do you think religious expression is going in America now, since your conversion, which was about 10 years ago, alhamdulillah? Since your conversion, I mean, in the you know how our expression of Islam has changed a lot. Yeah. You know, pre 9/11, post 9/11, and then today, now America is changing, you know, drastically in terms of religious expression for everybody. Where do you see that going? You know, religious expression in America going?
Well, I mean, when you say religious expression, I mean that's a pretty broad category. But let me answer it in the context in which I understand it, and in the context of my understanding of where the question is coming from. I mean, you speak of our European background. I mean, one of the things that I've meant in saying that is that, you know, as Muslims, oftentimes, you know, we think that something, you know, a phenomenon like Islamophobia is exclusively directed towards us as Muslims. All right. Now, I would argue that yes, there is an element of Islamophobia that has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that we are Muslims. All right. It is anti-Muslim bigotry. All right. I not only acknowledge that, I insist on that being recognized. But there's another dimension to that that's reacting to us as people who still believe in a public role for religion. All right. And coming out of the European experience, going back, you know, to the 16th century and the so-called wars of religion, Europe went through an experience out of which it emerged with the sense that religion is something from which society needs to be protected. All right. It needs to be privatized. It needs to be kept in the home. the moment you allow religion to come into the public space, let alone have any attachment to the powers of the state, you are courting disaster. All right. Now, for Muslims, that particular experience was not our experience. So we don't necessarily have those kinds of sensibilities, and we don't always understand why other people are looking at us in a way. They don't understand why we don't feel as threatened by religion as they may feel. All right. And part of what I want to say is that part of Islamophobia has to do with that. These are the people who want to sort of bring religion into a more publicly recognized mode of existence. Okay. And that's part of what we have to recognize in this country. Right. I mean, when people use the word religion, both what they say and what is understood is very much influenced by that European history with regard to religion. All right. So when you and I use religion, all right, for example, and I know that there are expressions of Islam today that would differ with this, but I'm talking about my understanding of Islam based on my years of study of Islam. You know, when we talk about religion, when I talk about religion, I talk about the ability to live a God-centered existence. All right. I'm not talking about necessarily trying to impose anything on anyone else. Right. Most people hear the imposition side of that. All right. And even my quest for power, okay, is much more for the purpose of being able to defend a way of life that I believe that I'm bound by God to live than it is to try to force you to live that way of life. Right. Most people don't see that. Right. And I think that, you know, we just have to be more savvy and more nuanced in the way we present these things, because we're using a language that we don't necessarily own. And therefore, the meanings that attach to the words that we use are not necessarily the ones that we mean.
Yeah. Yeah, most of our language we borrow from the Christian tradition, at least here in America, I think as a community. If that being said, what does dawah? So the gentleman who was the model for you when you converted, which was like for most of us, at least I'm from Detroit. You saw someone who modeled a behavior you really wanted. I mean, that's the Malcolm X. For a lot of African American men, he modeled, you know, that redemption, and then I always tell people I knew what I was supposed to do when I became Muslim because I just looked at what he did, clean myself up morally, and educate myself. What does dawah look like? And I know it's different levels to it, but with that, what you were just speaking about, the language, what does dawah begin to look like here outside of just, you know, the Detroit experience or the Philadelphia experience, when you're talking, you know, going, you know, almost nationwide to these different socioeconomic groups, different experiences?
Well, look, again, I mean, you know, I don't think that there's a single language of dawah. I don't think there's a single presentation of dawah. All right. What would work in, you know, an urban center like Philadelphia, all right, would not work in the neighborhood that I live in right now in California. Okay. And so I think that, I mean, if you're talking about dawah, I mean, there are a couple of prerequisites, and let me just mention a few. One is you cannot guide a people you don't care about. Just forget that, right? If you don't care about, in a genuine way, the people to whom you're trying to give this dawah, all right, their natural God-given instincts will alert them to that effect. And your dawah will probably not be very effective. And if it is, you may have more rather than less problems. All right? That's number one. So in doing dawah, we have to see ourselves as carriers of the mission of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right, and that means that, you know, living in a society that does not necessarily treat you the way that you feel you're entitled to be treated, does not necessarily accord you the rights that you feel you're entitled to. And even when it does not implement those things in the way that they should be implemented. All right. So there's all kinds of injustice, slights, all kinds of things going on around you, as there were around him. And yet he could sustain this sense, I want to guide my people. I care about my people. I love my people. I want to guide my people. And that means that I'm willing to put up with X, Y, and Z, all right, in the cause of giving the dawah to my people. That's number one. Number two, and I think that this is, I mean, we have to come to terms with this. There's a sort of a direct dawah where I come to you and I speak to you, all right? Or I come to you and I just model some behavior to you on an individual basis. And there's an indirect dawah. Once you give these people dawah, they're going to want to see how this is manifested in some kind of collective reality. And that's going to introduce them to communities, all right? Community life has to be, to an appreciable degree at least, it has to mirror the dawah. So if you're talking about brotherhood and then you come into the community, you don't find any brotherhood. You know, if you're talking about sisterhood, you know, if you're talking about respect, if you're talking about warmth and love, all right, and you don't find that, that's not going to be very effective dawah-wise, all right? And this is where I think that, you know, I think that oftentimes we think that the issues that we are confronting are these big mega issues, and I'm not denying the existence of mega issues, but a good part of what we must do as a community, we must heal as a community, all right? And we must become communities, all right, that enjoy the very reality of being a Muslim in our Muslim communities. All right. If I'm walking around and I am lonely, I am displaced, I am out of place, I have no confidence, I am angry, all right, that's not going to be very, very appealing in terms of any kind of dawah. All right. I mean, there's a lot to be said about this, but I mean that those are just a few thoughts on the question as you raised it. I don't believe that there's a single dawah to be given to everybody in America. All right. I mean, if you know, I think, quite frankly, perhaps one of the oversights that we've made with regard to dawah is that we recognize, I mean, you come from Detroit, I come from Philadelphia, all right? And there's a lot to be said about this, but I'll limit my comments here. We know firsthand the power of Islam in the lives of people on whom the rest of society have basically given up on, all right? Yeah. We've seen people who are living very, let's just call them challenging lives. And how Islam has brought people out of that, all right, and raised them to the heights. We've seen that in the Black community. And therefore we know, all right, the power of transformation that Islam carries. But we know that with regard to the Black community, all right? It never occurred to us, all right, to take that very power of transformation to poor white communities. All right. And I think that what we're seeing right now, all right, are certain powers that be capitalizing, all right, on the dislocated existence that poor whites live in this country. All right. And their feelings of being left out, being left behind, being overlooked, etc., are being exploited in ways that could have been preempted if Islam had gotten to those communities, right?
Yeah.
Now, clearly, however, you're not going to be able to give dawah to them in the same way that we might do in Detroit or in Philadelphia, all right? And I think that, we have to be careful about, no, not just be careful, we have to get over this classism that oftentimes characterizes Muslim communities in America. And I think that a lot of that comes from, this residual sense of being validated only when the elites of a society validate you.
Yeah.
All right. And wanting to be seen in that particular light. And let me be frank and honest about it. All right. This is not an easy thing necessarily to do. All right. And you don't necessarily get it right every day. But if your orientation is right, you follow what I'm saying? You're more rather than less likely to make progress in that regard. And if our orientation as a community is right, all right, then we have a chance.
No, I would say you're 100% correct in terms of poor whites. I was teaching my students today about Bacon's Rebellion, and they were saying like, "Oh, Bacon was just like the Pied Piper of today." And I said, "The story doesn't change. It's a story. Like, history it's a story of people. And sometimes people's issues don't change; they just come back later." So
there was a time when Islam in this country had the reputation of being a symbol of racial harmony.
Yeah.
Right? Islam had that reputation. Where did that go?
That's what I was going to ask you. What happened? What do you, in your experience, what do you feel like what happened?
I think a number of things happened. How nice is this interview supposed to be?
It's called Convert-sations. So we like to keep it, it's
no,
really.
I think that, no. Let me try and answer your question honestly, but let me preface it. Let me preface the conversation by saying something. I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating, because this is an important question that you're asking. But let me say, before I get into my answer, one of the things that I've discovered over the last number of years, and I'm sort of embarrassed to say that I was not as aware of it as perhaps I should have. And that is that the aftermath of 9/11 and the really dirty, toxic, negative, hateful energies that unleashed against Muslims in America really affected immigrant Muslim communities in a profound way. And that's not a slight to that community, all right? And I think that one of the reasons why I did not see it like that, all right, is that it didn't affect me in that way. You follow what I'm saying? And that's because I come from a very different tradition, all right, that has a certain transgenerational resilience built into it vis-a-vis all those kinds of things. All right, I'm the son of two, my father went through the 5th grade, all right, in the Jim Crow South.
Yeah.
You follow what I mean by that? Yeah. It's like, how do you live that stuff and not come home and just want to beat your kids to death or something? How do you maintain your sanity in a world like that? And yet they somehow acquired the strength to maintain dignified lives, okay? Where they're trying to raise families and raise them to be decent, not to be hateful, okay? I have that in my life. My mother's 88 years old. She's living with me right now. She's right over there. Okay. So I didn't feel that. Do you identify with this, Manny?
No, no, I do. No, yeah, no, not. I think
I told somebody this. I told somebody this. I have a nephew. I hope he don't get mad at me. When 9/11 happened, he must have been about 12 years old. The day after 9/11, schools were closed. The next day, this kid went to school with a thobe. No, I'm very serious. And his whole attitude was, say something. Say something. I mean, that's where we were, all right? Yeah. The immigrant community wasn't there. No, I'm trying to be very serious about this. And I hope, and maybe some of them will speak up. I mean, because I don't want to make things worse. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that, immigrants were weak and we were strong. That's why we weren't affected and they were. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. We have two let me tell you something. I mean, I'm from Philly, right? And I know social violence. Yeah. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah. I don't know political violence. No. Does that make sense to you? No, it makes sense. I remember I was in Cairo at Tahrir Square on the night of the runoff between Morsi and Rafiq. I was there in Tahrir Square. All right? I won't say never been asked. I was scared. Yeah. That was different. That's a different kind of violence. Yes. That's a different kind. That's a whole different kind of mix. Yep. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, I just wasn't used to that. Right. I just wasn't used to that. All right. And the energy that came out of that, I didn't even know how to interpret it. It scared me. Yeah. Right. Many immigrant Muslims in America were affected like that by 9/11. Now, why am I saying all this? I'm saying that because that makes it very difficult for us to talk about our issues because we have to assign, all right, accountability, not for the purpose of beating people upside the head, but for the purpose of being able to come to an understanding that draws us into a conversation that enables us to move forward. Yeah. You follow what I'm saying? No, right? I follow you. Yeah. So now, with that said, I think that, we dropped the ball on race in America, right? And there are two reasons for that. I think the immigrant community came to America not understanding the centrality of race to America, not understanding a society where the major fault line was race, not religion, all right? And even though I think that the Muslim world is just as susceptible to white supremacy as anybody else in the world. And so those attitudes would come with some of those brothers and sisters from the Muslim world, all right? They were not used to a society, all right, where the fundamental fault line was race, all right? So race didn't quite register with them, all right? Yeah. Like it did with us. Okay, I mean, you look. You may remember that. With that, I mean, I would agree with you on that. But there's another side because they're not the only ones who contributed to this. This is what I want to get to. So let me just say this, and then we can get back to your point. So you have them sort of racially agnostic almost, right? I mean, people don't remember this, and this is why sometimes it gets hard to talk to some of the young people. People don't remember this. In the 1990s, all right, certainly the immigrant Muslim community were staunchly Republican. Oh yeah. We don't remember that. Yeah. It was family values. It was hard work. It was they don't. That's what they understood. All right, and it made sense. It's not crazy, right? They just don't understand it in this context. all right? So they were vacating race in a sense, all right? On the other hand, and we have to be honest about this, and let me just talk about myself, and anybody who identifies with this identifies with it, they don't. But I think that there was a sense in the Black community that we too were susceptible to a sort of a race-blind understanding of Islam, because we were trying to retrieve Islam back, all right, from the racialized image that had attached to it from the Nation of Islam. Right?
Yeah.
We were trying to say that, there's no such thing. Racist is not important in Islam. This is a human thing. Yeah. It's not a Black thing. It's not a white thing. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
right?
Universal.
So it's a universal thing. All right. Yeah. And part of that was that we didn't really know how to concretize this thing in America. Right. And that's what I spent the last 25 years of my life trying to do. All right. We didn't really know how to do that. And so you have the immigrant community sort of vacating race. You have the Black American community, at least segments of them, sort of vacating race. All right. Yeah. And we become sort of racially blind, racially agnostic. All right. Failing to understand where we fundamentally are. In America, we are a racialized society. All right. And any religion that doesn't learn to deal with that in such a manner, all right, that empowers the races in America to come together in a mutually empowered way, all right, I'm not sure where that religion goes. I mean, it may have a lifeboat, sort of, it may engage in sort of a lifeboat religion where it recedes to some corner and it just throws pot shots at America, at society at large. It's going to hell in a handbasket. You can do that, all right? Yeah. Or you can escape into some, utopian grand Muslim past, or African past, all right? But to be shapers and makers of this society, you have to come to terms with race here, and hopefully, and this is another challenge that we have. We should be able to arrive at our own critique of the racialized situation in America as Muslims, and not necessarily always have to follow somebody else's articulation of that. That's where I think we are today. That's another issue.
So I wanted to say something. Sabrina wants to ask a question. I wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said, camelback on what you said here about. So my mother was just telling me 2 days ago that my great grandfather was white. Mm-hmm. And my mother was, busting in integration, going to school, integrating schools, called the monkey apes, look at the baboons coming into school. And when you talk about intergenerational, the strength you get intergenerationally, that's real. And I will say, for us, it was different. 9/11 was different. But I wonder what happened to Dawa, even to African Americans with each other because of 9/11. Like where the Dawa had the Dawa.
I think that 9/11 did have a chilling effect on the Muslim community at large. I just don't think it was the same for Black Americans as it was for the immigrant community. So, for example, I mean, I don't think that Black Americans would have been rushing to slap flags on the back of their cars, for example. No. So I think it was different. The other thing I think that happened is that we've been forced to sort of really discipline ourselves and begin to think about, well, what is it that we really want to say to America? All right? What is it that we really want to say to, Black people in America from all classes, all right? To white people in America, from, Latino people in America, from all classes. What is it that we really want to say? What is the message of Islam? All right? And then how do we package that? I think that we've not quite figured that out yet. We had a sense of that, 40 years ago, okay? I think it's less clear to most of us now.
Yeah, true. All right, Sabria.
Okay, so we have a question. Anybody else who has questions, I see some are being posted. You can also send them to me. So our first question was something that you mentioned earlier, and this was from a conversation that a friend and I were having the other day, and so she sent it in again. We've noticed that over the past couple of years, there's been a big emphasis on learning, especially learning like fiqh.
On what?
On learning, so studying the deen, and especially on more detailed things, so learning fiqh or learning like the maqasid or things like that. But there's also a gap where a lot of people have a lack of connection, so a lack of the basics, so a lack of connection to Allah, a lack of connection with the Prophet ﷺ. And so how do we bridge that gap in terms of young people especially? So that's what we learn in like Islamic schools or Sunday schools. How do we bridge the gap and kind of connect those things or go back to the basics?
Well, I mean, look, again, Sabria, I mean, and this is gonna, on some level, this is gonna sound like a cop-out, but I think that one of the habits, one of the mental habits that we have to get out of is this constantly asking, how do we do this? As if there is a single quote unquote Islamic answer, all right, about how to do it, okay? There may be many, many different ways of doing it, all right? All of which are halal. And what we have to do is have the confidence and be comfortable enough in our own skins, all right, to be able to make a determination about which of those halals are most suitable for this particular predicament that we now find ourselves in, all right? We cannot go back to the books of Al-Ghazali, all right? I mean, to tell me what to do, all right, when my children act up, all right? No, I mean, right? And this again, Sabria, this is where, you know, we should be benefiting more from the capital that we possess as a community, right? I mean, I might consult Manik about this stuff. I mean, what do you do, all right? And I may be able to take 30% of that because the rest is not gonna work for me, okay? And I think that this has to be a part of our education as Muslims, okay? Because what we end up doing oftentimes is undermine Muslims with these answers, all right? We tell them that there's a concrete, specific answer for absolutely everything. And then when it doesn't work, Islam doesn't work, right? But so where in the Quran will I find out, well, who should I marry? It will give me some guidelines. The Prophet will tell me, you should marry somebody like this, you should marry somebody like that. But who is that person in concrete terms? You know what I mean by that? And what we've sort of been taught to do, all right, is absolve ourselves of our responsibility in this regard. This is what prayer is for. This is what turning to Allah is for. If all the answers were there, why would I need to ask Allah for anything? In a sense, this is part of the relearning of Islam that we have to do. All right? I mean, we're not going to be able to, it's quote unquote, this language is going to get a little problematic because I'm working on something right now. I'm redefining the whole definition of Islamic. But what I'm saying is that, you know, we do Quran and Sunnah a disservice. Okay? All right? The Prophet ain't going to tell me what to buy my wife for her birthday. He's not going to tell me that. I have to figure that out.
Yeah.
All right? You see, and what I'm saying is that this has to be a part of my understanding of what it means to be a Muslim. All right? You know, Allah has given me, you know, a mind, a heart. He has, you know, blessed me with certain circumstances, all right? And he expects me to use these, all right? I mean, you think that if all the answer was just always just right there, that anybody would have died among the Sahaba? No, you understand what I mean by that? They had to do what they thought was the best thing to do at that time. under those circumstances, given the resources, given the exigency, etc. All right? And they turn to Allah for tawfiq. And when Allah wills to bless, He will bless. He may postpone for some wisdom that only He knows. Okay? But we are not going to find all the answers that we're looking for in some book. And that's got to be a part of the relearning of Islam. Okay? And when we can come together and we can discuss our issues in that vein, okay, we're likely to make a lot more progress.
Sounds good. We have 2 more questions that I see if you're up for it. Are you good? Can we ask some more?
He good. I guess he.
I would prefer people ask the questions that they really have, and not ask them and then go tell people that I said something I didn't say.
Okay. We'll make sure nobody edits this. Okay. So the first one was in relation to what you're talking about in terms of racial relations and things like that. Have you encountered examples that are a start at coming to terms with race in our community?
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think that, you know, so sort of in a sense, one has to be careful about how one articulates these things. I mean, in a sense, there was a silver lining to 9/11, right? Because that was the beginning of a certain recognition. We'll put it this way. I remember, I remember, you know, back in, say, for example, 1999 or the year 2000 for that matter, right? You know, if I had gone to a masjid and given a khutbah in which I quoted, let's say, Martin Luther King Jr., all right, or I drew an example from the civil rights movement, all right? In most immigrant communities, someone might have sort of pulled my coat after the khutbah and said, you know, something like, you know, you're Muslim now, right? You know that, right? I mean, why are you quoting those non-Muslims in the khutbah? Or something along those lines, all right? Post 9/11, all right, it would not be far-fetched to hear an immigrant imam quote MLK, all right, quote the civil rights movement in a khutbah, all right? So there was this incentive to sort of come together and to begin to recognize, you know, a mutual situatedness, all right? And that opened up opportunities for more discussions of race, all right? But I think that, to me, where our Muslim discussions of race, in a sense, fail, is that they fail in 2 ways. And please keep in mind what I said earlier about I'm very sensitive to the feelings of the Muslim immigrant community. But I think we engage race in ways that, number one, we treat racism in America as a Black problem, right? It's always, well, what can we do for the brothers and sisters? All right, and usually, by the way, what can we do for the brothers? The sisters usually don't get that mention. What can we do for the brothers? All right, now, this is a failure on 2 levels, all right? One, to address racism in America has to address the parties who are responsible for it. Do you understand what I mean by that? If this is the only example that comes to my mind. You know, it's like it would be like I abuse my daughter, all right? And then you don't recognize me as having a problem. You recognize only her as having a problem. Do you understand what I mean by that? All right? We look at, oh, and it's very paternalistic the way we do it at times. Oh, the poor brothers, the poor blacks, what can we do to help the poor? Help the people who are responsible for this stuff. All right? Help them heal. Why does this happen? There's a sickness afoot. All right? That's the first way in which we fail. All right? The second way in which we fail, all right, is that many Muslims pretend that they are immune to white supremacy. That's only a black problem as well. All right? And yet, it is not the criticisms of anyone but the white West that will incentivize Muslims to change their religion. Right? I mean, if the Danish cartoons had been produced in Paraguay, what do you think would have happened?
Nothing.
Why is that? And why do we deny that? Right? If both of us recognize these two sides of the issue, that's another way of us coming together and addressing a common issue from a position of principle. All right? Because, I mean, to borrow the expression of my brother Bilal Ware, racism is a satanic religion. It's Iblis all over again. I'm better than you because. All right? This is what we need to recognize. Racism in America is not a black problem. I mean, blacks may be the victims, all right? But so would my daughter be. Would you come to my house and say to my daughter, well, what's wrong with you? You follow what I'm saying? What's wrong with you? Or would you address me? That's a sick father who abused his daughter. This is part of the problem that we have, all right? And a lot of that, you know, it comes from a place of deep insecurity because white supremacy is a very powerful, powerful, powerful reality, all right? Okay? You know, I'll say this. I got to go in about 20 minutes. But I'll say this, and I'm not trying to throw anybody on the bus. I'll say it without any names. There's a very prominent Black American intellectual once, and he told a story about how a white woman came up to him once and said, you know, Professor, I just want to tell you how brilliant I think you are. Everything comes out of your mouth, it's just so brilliant. But I got one complaint. You're a little bit behind the times because you keep talking about all this white supremacy and this racism stuff, all right? And we've gone beyond that, all right? And he said to this woman, he said, well, thank you very much for your compliment. But if I still got a little bit of white supremacy in me, I suspect you got a little bit in you as well. Right? And I think Bismillah Islam, not for the brothers. All right? Muslims have got to face the reality. All right? Or let's put it like this. Muslims have to face the question, how much white supremacy do I have in me? Because it will affect your Islam. That's what I think. And so there might be some ILM students on here. If there are, they'll get a little kick out of this. This is the sine qua non of doing Islam in America. You can't do it without this.
Yeah.
That's too heavy, isn't it?
That's a question. I had a follow-up, but go ahead.
Okay. No, go ahead, please.
No, okay. So then that means, like, one of the things me and Ubaidullah were discussing when we became Muslim, when you were saying, like, you wanted to be cool. And for us, Islam was still cool. All the conscious rappers were Muslim. Music, I mean, when a Muslim in a movie was the cool, conscious, you know, moral and ethical actor. You've mentioned how important it is to create culture. Can you elaborate on that a little bit in regards to dawah, not just being the individual or the modeling, but creating a culture where it's cool to be Muslim?
Yeah, but I mean, look, I think that, I mean, the reality is, and that's why there's not just one way of dawah. I mean, the reality is that people don't live in the world of doctrine. People live in the world of culture, right? And most of what people do on a daily basis is pretty unthought, all right? They know the rhythm of a certain culture. They go outside, they get the rhythm, they know how to walk, they know how to talk, they know how to argue in the context of that rhythm. You follow what I'm saying? They don't have to figure all that out, okay? And I think that part of our challenge is that the culture here will, in a sense, define how some Muslims, not just non-Muslims, how some Muslims see Islam. All right? I mean, the example I give, I don't know if you guys have ever read 1984, George Orwell.
Oh, well. Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in that book where the guy puts Winston in this chair, and Winston's the victim, puts him in this chair. It's a pain chair. There's a dial on, you can just turn the pain up. And he holds up 3 fingers. And he says to Winston, how many fingers am I holding up? And Winston says 3. And the guy says, no, I'm holding up 4. And he says, I only see 3. He says, I'm holding up 4. And he cranks up the pain on the pain chair. And he cranks it up so high that although he's only holding up 3 fingers, Winston tells him, okay, now I see 4. I see 4 fingers, all right? In other words, the pain that he was feeling altered his mind, altered his powers of perception to the point that he could see what he wanted him to see rather than what he really was seeing, all right? We live in a culture now that can have the same effect on us as Muslims as that pain chair had on Winston. They can crank up the dial, all right? And we can see all kinds of things in Quran that are not there. And we cannot see all kinds of things in the Quran that are there, all right? Based solely on the cultural context in which we are living, all right? And I think that part of what we must recognize is that, you know, one of the amazing feats of the Nation of Islam is that they created a cultural matrix, all right? A matrix that basically said that you don't need necessarily to even import a culture, all right? You can appropriate and refashion from within, okay? That culture, however, simply needs to be believable as your own. I mean, just imagine this, Manny. You know, it's 1975, 1980. There's a guy walking down the street with a 3-piece suit and a bow tie. And what do you say? There goes one of those black Muslims.
Yeah.
You know, this is amazing. This is amazing. Yeah. This is amazing. All right? And with that kind of appropriation, what incentive do you have to hide anything? You follow what I'm saying? What disincentive do you have to be confident, to be proud? All right? Cultural creation is very important, but cultural creation has to begin from a place of taqwa. It has to have as part of the incentive, qurba, the desire to draw near to God. All right? Otherwise, you know, it'll just be a replica of just what's out there with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim on the front of it, which may not at all serve us.
Hey,
so there's one more question, but I would say because of the emphasis on cultural creation, if we can, after Dr. Jackson's finished, people can stick around and hear more about Amin, because that's one of the things we focus on is cultural creation. Just wanted to put that in there before.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think the enterprise of cultural creation, just like the enterprise of intellectual creation, is going to require something in America that I think that we have not been, in my estimation, as attentive to as we should be. You know, when you ask yourself the following question, there was no Ministry of Education 1,000 years ago in the Muslim world, all right? there were no government schools 1,000 years ago in the Muslim world. All right. There were no government institutes, no government colleges. All right. There were none. The question becomes now then, well, if there were no government schools, where did Al-Ghazali come from? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How was he educated? All right. He was educated because the moneyed classes in the Muslim world understood the importance of investing in the intellectual capital of the community. And these people, all right, many of whose names you will never know, all right, donated, and many of whom were women, donated, dedicated their wealth, all right, to charitable trusts that were for the purpose of producing the kind of thought that Muslims needed, all right? We need the same kind of thing here, and we need it perhaps even more, equally so, with regard to cultural creation, all right? I mean, you got all kinds of prizes for all kinds of things all over the place. Where are the Muslim prizes for the cultural creation? Did you follow what I mean by that?
Yeah.
All right. Where are the prizes, you know, for the Muslim fashion designer? Where are they? How do you incentivize these things? You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's part of what it means to be a community. All right. And I would really urge the moneyed community, you know, to recognize its critical role in Islam today. Right? Because we cannot depend on governments. If that's not clear now, I don't know when it's going to be clear.
No.
So this is also a part of the cultural creation piece, right? You want people to create culture and they're all just poor, you know, the lights getting shut off and all these kinds of things. I mean, how sustainable is that?
Yeah.
How sustainable is that?
Starving artists don't last long. Nobody wants to be the starving artist. That's a bit.
Okay, so this was also in relation to the race question. So I'm just going to ask it, you can answer, and then just give any kind of wrap up advice or letting go. Anything you want to say to end it up. So this question says, I heard from an elder once in talking about spreading Islam in the US, specifically among Black people, that the best way would be to marry your sons and daughters, integrate within that community. Once you get that community, you can get the rest. What do you think about this evaluation? So that's the question. I think it's basically talking about,
I mean, look.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that man, how can I put this in a way that will really drive home this question? I think you may have been there in the class, Sabria, but let me put it this way. All right. We're living in Muslim communities now, all right, where, you know, we have a language with which we speak, and through that language, we express our quote unquote love for one another, right? And, you know, we'll quote the Prophet, you know, none of you believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself, all right? So we love each other, right? The question comes down to this. Do we like each other? What kind of community is that? Regardless of who you marry. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
All right. And this is a part of community building. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Tahadu fatahabu." All right. Give gifts to one another. That'll make you love one another. That'll bring you closer to one another. This is the stuff of community building. All right. How do we bring our hearts back together? All right. How do we begin to see ourselves as a community and as a community that has a mission? And this is really important. I remember a sheikh told me once, this is 30 years ago. I was 5 years old. Anyway, no, he said, the problem of the Muslim today is that his psyche has been damaged. because he has completely lost any sense of mission. There's no sense of mission. All right. And we see this in the following. You see, Manik, you and I, if we are drawn into a sense of mission, all right, and you do something that hurts my feelings, or maybe just pisses me off, all right, I may come at you. But because we share a sense of mission, I'm not going to come at you in a way that jeopardizes mission. You understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
All right? We don't have any sense of mission. Oh, it's von Clausewitz, total destruction, war. You follow what I mean by that? And that's sort of where we are now. We destroy each other because we have no sense of mission. We have no understanding, all right, that we have to find ways collectively of bring pressure and power to bear, all right, on those institutions and those repositories of power and influence, all right, that affect our lives. We can't do that as individuals. And even if I think you're wrong, Malik, I'm still going to try to deal with that in a way that doesn't destroy the possibility of being able to prosecute and rise to the mission. That's where we are now. We don't have a sense of mission. And that's why we can treat each other in the way that we treat each other. All right? And as long as that remains the case, well, so you marry somebody and you bring them into a community that has no sense of mission. Does everybody follow what I mean by that? And so part of what I'm saying is that, yes, we have huge problems. I mean, I'm an intellectual. I mean, I do that kind of stuff for a living. I mean, I live and breathe that stuff, all right? But on an everyday basis, a lot of it is just how do we come together, all right? Love and like one another, respect one another, see each other as part of a common mission. And even when we disagree, I'm not going to destroy our ability to continue with the mission. Certainly to the extent that I can do that. All right? That to me is very, very important, because I don't think that we realize, some of the internal bleeding that's going on in Muslim communities today. It's not visible, It's internal bleeding. All right? It's a kind of, the kind of wound that you get, from microaggressions and slights. All right? And that kind of stuff you just don't want to go around. How are we going to build like that? Right? And I've said for some time, to me, I would say 30% of our problem is adab. 30% is courage. 40%, only 40, if that. But without adab and without courage, all that knowledge is not gonna do us a whole lot of good. What does the Lord say to the Prophet? If you have been
harsh,
just nasty, just nasty and harsh, they would have just departed from around you, and you were the messenger of God with the truth. That's the importance of adab. Look, we have a man who came to us with revelation from God, and he got right down to saying, what? If there are 3 of you, no 2 of you whisper. Can you imagine that? Our prophet taught us this. What is he saying? That's how important your feelings are. Because he knows that goes, the mission goes.
Thank you for that. I just want to say thank you. We want to say thank you. And we want to ask for any wrap up advice or anything you want to end off with, but I know you have to go, so.
Well, yeah, I just want to I just want to say that my dua is that inshallah Allah will guide you all to us all to understanding my words in the best possible manner that will produce the best possible results. I hope I have not said anything that will mislead or in any way injure anyone. I am personally someone. I am still optimistic. I'm hopeful about the prospects of Islam, the prospects of Islam in America, because I don't think that we've been trying it the right way and failing. All right, I don't think that that is the case. I think that we've misfired, we've misunderstood some things. We're a young community in America, so we've had to learn some things. And I still think that we can do it. I think that Islam has within its teachings, it has models, all right, that can instruct and inspire us to do the kinds of things that we need to do, and hopefully, Allah will bring that to fruition in a manner that is pleasing to Him and that's beneficial to us, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. Alhamdulillah, it's always good to see you. And what you left us with some real powerful words and really things to think about. When you were talking about adab, I was thinking about maybe this is part of the reason why we lose. When you say we lose converts, and I always think we don't lose people to Tawheed. Nobody leaves Tawheed. I think very few people leave Tawheed. They may leave the communal expression in which they probably were slighted.
Yeah, and I think that to be fair, you see, and this is where knowledge comes in, okay? Because oftentimes the people who are most offensive are the most well-meaning.
Yeah.
You follow what I'm saying? They just don't know what Islam provides them in terms of leeway with regard to how they deal with that situation. You follow what I'm saying? All right. Yes. And that leads us sometimes, to overreact or to react in ways that don't allow people the opportunity to grow. All right. We're not wise enough to do that. We don't know enough sunnah to be able to do that. So knowledge is important in that regard. But the human element in our deen, the human element in our Islam, all right, that's lost.
Yeah.
Then Islam is just a bunch of empty doctrines.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm gonna say one last thing. I really think it's important that we don't allow the circumstances as they presently are, or as we may perceive them to be, to disabuse us of an awareness of what it is we actually enjoy about being Muslim. Okay? So much of our energy is, we got to deal with this. We got to deal with that. Oh, this challenge, that challenge. All right. And sometimes we can lose sight of how joyous it is to be a Muslim. Did you follow what I'm saying? The little joys that we get from being Muslim. All right? And we can't lose sight of that. And we got to share that. All right? Because that's a part of this deen as well.
I would leave off, but I really appreciate you sharing your story. And as someone who grew up in the church, who used to see people come testify about what God has done for them, I really, that part of the point of Convert-sations is to inspire people. That you hear these people's testimonials and you see what people came from and what Allah has brought them to and what Allah has manifested things in them. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your story about growing up in Philly, because it reminds me of growing up in Detroit. And what? Yeah.
But this is what I'm trying to say. I mean, we've got to establish and maintain that relationship with Allah. We've got to know, this is up to Allah. People ask me. I'll say this, and I really got to go. People ask me, how did you make it in the academy? I mean, how did you know, you writing books on Islam and Black suffering and all this stuff, and how praying, and how did you make it in the academy? And the answer is, I have no idea. I didn't have any plan. I literally put my trust in Allah.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
And knowing it's up to him. Ultimately. Right? I mean, a lot of people will hear that the wrong way. I mean, I don't say I don't work. I don't say I don't read, I don't study. I don't, of course I do. All right. But there are people who read a lot more than I do, or just as much as I do, study a lot more than I do, or just as much as I do. All right. And they don't have what I have. Right? The people who study a lot less than I do, and they have more than what I have. All right? So we have to understand, all right, that our lives are in Allah's hands. And the key to this life, all right, is always trying to stay in Allah's favor. All right? Okay? Because if that's the case, no matter what happens, it's good for you.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khairan.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Hopefully we'll be able to see you soon.
Inshallah. It'll be good to see you again, man. I always love to see that smiling face, man. And I enjoyed the time I was down there in Memphis, man. It was a nice visit. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. No, it's always good to be around you. I would let you depart on this. One of the things since I became Muslim, I always wanted was some uncles. Because growing up in Detroit, you grow up with uncles in the neighborhood, and I always wanted some Muslim uncles. And I take you as one of those, and it's always good to see you. When I see my uncles, it's always good to see you. Alhamdulillah. So again, thank you very much. Inshallah, inshallah, we'll see you soon.
Let's keep us in your dua, inshallah ta'ala.
Will do, and you do the same for us, inshallah.
Inshallah, Ameen. Okay, I got a mind, inshallah. Inshallah, maybe we'll do this again soon sometime.
Inshallah.
Okay? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Okay. So everyone else, if you could, we want to thank you all for coming out to the conversations. We want to just talk a little bit about Ameen before everybody leaves. Ameen, so you can pull it up. Ameen is an organization that focuses on, our initial focus is on converts, people who are seeking to become Muslim or learn more about Islam, or people who want to return back to the faith. If they grew up, they just want a connection with the divine. That's our first group. And the second thing, we just try to treat people well, in the sense of be a warm and welcoming space for people and create connections. We do this through discussions. We have book clubs and just open discussion with each other. And the third thing is we talk about creating positive cultural expression. So last week we had a poetry slam with our brother Tariq Touré. Inshallah, once the virus subsides, inshallah, we want to have more poetry slams. We're going to do festivals. Like I said, we do book clubs, things that create positive cultural expression. So we create we have shirts, things of that sort. So instead of cursing the culture, that this is so bad, there's nothing good in the culture, we like to shine a light on the culture by shining, the light on things that are positive, things that are good, and those people who are doing good things. As you see here, film screenings and discussions, those are the things we want to do to that for people who are looking to live a moral existence, to have a moral life here, we try to create morally safe activities as well. So that's the three things. The one here where we see community outreach, conferences, panels, things like that, community partnerships, and community service. So if anyone is interested, you can go to ameenusa.org. It's our website. Inshallah, we have a part there where you can ask questions. Inshallah, we try to get back to those questions pretty quickly. Again, thank everybody for coming out. And inshallah, we'll end with Surah Al-Asr. And inshallah, you can see us out next month. So please check the website or get on the email list as well. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wal asr, inna insana fi khusr, inna alladhina amanu wa aminu salihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Inshallah, jazakumullah khairan for everybody for coming out. And inshallah, we'll see you all in a couple of weeks.